Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to invite you to prepare yourselves for this evening's plenary speaker. I have the privilege of introducing the president of the college, where I have the privilege of teaching. And what is unique about the King's College in New York City is that its heartbeat is very similar to that of the Acton Institute. I just want to remind you all of the guiding principles of the Acton Institute. You could read the descriptions of this on the website. The Acton Institute values, and you'll hear these themes while you're here, values the dignity of the person. Why? Because every human being is made in the image and likeness of God. So people matter. And their flourishing and their destinies matter. And by extension then, from the human person, these other principles include things like the social nature of the person. The fact that we were all born into community, for the other. Related to, connected to the other. We are not independent, we are interdependent by definition. It includes the importance of social institutions. You'll hear a lot this week, over the next couple of days, about the importance of mediating institutions, civil society institutions. We care about human action, human beings made in God's image who have been given reason and creativity and been commanded to use that creativity to steward the entire creation. The fact that people are sinful, that we have moral limitations that impede our capacity to be what it is that God has created the human person to be. The rule of law and the subsidiary role of government. The creation of wealth. That the greatest solution to poverty is the flourishing of wealth. Economic liberty. As societies flourish, as economic opportunities expand, those benefit all of those within the context of civil society. And the freedom to do that actually is something that ennobles human dignity. And of course, economic value. We care about those things as well. We value the marketplace and what it does to free the human person to be what God created persons to be. And of course, the priority of culture. Now, these principles, these ideas that have formed and shaped the work of the Acton Institute, I can tell you that these are the principles that are also embedded into the curriculum at the King's College in New York City. And while Acton University doesn't give degrees out as an extension of these principles, the King's College actually does. And I can tell you, as a professor there, I make sure that my students watch Poverty Cure. I make sure that my students watch and are introduced to For the Life of the World, or the Flow video series. I make sure that our students are introduced and saturated, that they know these ideas, because it matters not just for their vocations, but for their person as well. So the King's College is a place in New York City that is the only institution in that city where these principles are embedded into the DNA, and we send our students out into New York City and the world with these principles in hand and in mind and in heart, at least the ones that do well in my class. So the president of the King's College, who is leading us in this mission, which you will hear tonight, is Dr. Gregory Allen Thornbury. He serves as the sixth president of the King's College in New York City. And the college seeks to prepare leaders for strategic institutions in society through courses of study in politics, philosophy, and economics, business, finance, media, culture, and the arts, and our new program beginning this year in religious and theological studies. He's been called, quote, Jonathan Edwards meets Rolling Stone by Russell Moore, and, quote, America's first hipster college president, end of quote, by the American Spectator. He previously held the posts of professor of philosophy and dean of the School of Theology and vice president for spiritual life at Union University. He is the author of Recovering Classic Evangelicalism, Applying the Wisdom and Vision of Carl F. Henry. In addition, he is a senior fellow of the Kairos Journal, as well as a visiting professor of a school in Norway that I also cannot pronounce. My friends, would you join me in welcoming the president of the King's College, Gregory Allen Thornbury.
Thank you, Tony. Well, good evening. I suppose the appropriate New York attestation here is to say, how you doing? Right? To which you're supposed to respond, no, how you doing? And then we kind of go back and forth like that a little bit. It is wonderful to be here. As you've been sitting around the table, I was a little bit chagrined to see my little picture on each one of the tables, and maybe some of you might have had the same reaction that one member of the New York media had when I was appointed president of the King's College almost 2 years ago, in which he said, Harry Potter elected sixth president of the King's College in New York City, to which I responded, I will take that compliment as long as I can get it. The only thing better would have been if they would have said Doctor Who. But as you've just heard from Tony, it's not hard to get motivated to go to work in the morning at the King's College on Wall Street. Just so you know where we are, in case you visit, we're in a very popular place for tourists to visit. We're located on Wall Street, just a block off of Wall Street on Exchange Place. I can look out my office window and see Trinity Church, Wall Street. Just for those of you that might be wondering, I have looked for the college's endowment in the basement of Trinity Wall Street. For those of you that saw National Treasure, I did not find anything there, so I'm still looking for donors to help us build the endowment for the college. I did like that internet meme that I saw after Nicolas Cage had been in that horrid Left Behind Rapture movie that said, now that the rapture has happened, I'm free to steal the United States Constitution. So that's where we are. You know where we're located, and we would love for you to visit sometime in the near future as you find yourself in New York City, which many of you often do. It is a great privilege to be here tonight and to be at this august gathering of what I would consider the most significant congregation of Christian intellectuals and elite nonprofits, colleges, universities, and church organizations anywhere in the country. Acton University is a significant achievement for the future of Christianity in America. So thank you so much for being here. It is a privilege to be counted amongst the friends of this institution, and I want to thank Father Sirico, a man in whose debt I think it's fair to say we all stand. And also, I want to say, I think the location of the Acton Institute is significant. Now, as all of you know, if you've heard me speak ever before, you know how much I love New York City. And I often like to refer to what I guess now Saint Pope John Paul II, and for my students at the King's College, I just shortened that to J2P2 for short, because Saint Pope John Paul II is a mouthful. In his great mass in Central Park, called New York City the capital of the world. And I vividly remember reading Richard John Newhouse's essay in First Things after he made that famous comment. However, Being here in Grand Rapids is particularly satisfying because I would regard Grand Rapids, Michigan as the Christian Athens of America, if New York City is the capital of the world. And it is great to be here in a city that has birthed so much flourishing of Christian civilization. Now, with those deferences being made, I'd like to dive right into what is my sort of central thesis tonight. And as you might expect from a Giants fan, this is going to be very straight up the middle New York Giants football that you're going to get here this evening. My primary goal here is to encourage you to stay the course and keep the faith. But I would like to do that in maybe some ways that might be surprising to you, hopefully. As an expatriate Baptist living in New York City, rather than having 3 points tonight, I really only have 2. And then I also have a couple of practical entailments that I would like to talk. And then I think we'll get some time to do some questions and answers. So as brothers and sisters in arms, I tweeted this morning that it's great to be at the Acton Institute where all the men are strong, all the women are brilliant, and all the children are reading Thucydides. So this is a very intellectual crowd. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the landscape in which we find ourselves and where we might find some unlikely encouragement for our own orthodoxy and for our advocacy of free market values and principles. And those unlikely sources turn out to be secular, agnostic, and atheist philosophers. So more on that in a second. But I do think that we live in a culture right now. I'm the president of a Christian nonprofit. I think that we have sort of settled into a disposition that I would call an Eeyore worldview in institutional leadership. I don't know if there's any Winnie the Pooh fans out there, but I fear that what we have so much of the time is the Eeyore worldview of Eeyore, we are in a time of inevitable decline. Eeyore, we have lost our position in culture. Eeyore, we are facing lawsuits. And I was talking to Al Mohler, my mentor, recently, and he said he is developing a bumper sticker that should be available by this time next year for Acton University that just says, lawsuits will come. So maybe not peace will come, but lawsuits will come. But I think that we're better than the Eeyore worldview. I think we all represent institutions here in this room that are made of better stuff, and we have a lot of fight left in us for this situation in which we find ourselves in what I would characterize as not just post-Christian or post-Christian. We are now in a post-reality situation. And I think for that reason, we need to be outworking something that I like to say to my students about the nature of what it means to be a Christian in this post-reality context. And it's this. If I've said any one thing that might go on Goodreads as a quote that I've given in my lifetime, it's probably this. Christian is the greatest of all possible nouns and the lamest of all possible adjectives. We shouldn't be focused on doing Christian art or Christian business or Christian law. We need to be competing in the marketplace of ideas as Christians, holding forth all of the ideas that have caused the flourishing of Western civilization. And this is the admonition that we have received from the giants of the faith throughout Christian history. I'm thinking particularly in this circumstance of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who in Life Together, as he was facing a situation, as you know, far graver than ours, and writing, people forget, Life Together was written to a tiny seminary community. It wasn't principally written to lay people, it was written to future church leaders. Bonhoeffer said, Jesus Christ lived in the midst of his enemies. At the end, all of his disciples deserted him. On the cross, he was utterly alone, surrounded by evildoers and mockers. For this cause, he had to come to bring peace to the enemies of God. So the Christian, too, belongs not in the seclusion of a cloistered life, but in the thick of his foes. There is his commission. This is his work. So tonight, what I would like to do is to refocus our attention on sort of two themes. The Christian as the negation of negation. I'll get to that in a second. And Christian as the new pariah. And I think we ought to embrace both of these ideas. I was recently remembering my third grade teacher, Mrs. Duckworth in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, who was herself a hippie. And in third grade, she made us read George Orwell's Animal Farm. So for years, I have been fascinated with Animal Farm because I read it in third grade, and we were made to act out the parts in the third grade. I was Snowball. And I was reminded recently of a line that was in Orwell's discarded preface to Animal Farm, in which he said, "If liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they do not want to hear." And I think that it has now fallen to us that is now our role, is as lovers of liberty, is to serially, chronologically, and persistently tell people things that they don't want to hear. And so this gets to my first point tonight of Christian witness as negation of negation. What I would like to suggest in this portion of the program is that despite what we might think, where we hear all of the calls of the radical left or of the zeitgeist of our time for the church to accommodate, for the church to ameliorate, for us to change our positions on whether it be on marriage or sexuality or identity or economics or whatever, I don't really think they're serious. I think deep down, history shows that people who are our counterparts on the secular left are reality testing. They deeply do not want us to change. Because as soon as we do change, they're not what they want us to be anymore. They want to have a loyal opposition. Now, I just saw that there is a reset of Michael Novak's The Spirit of Democratic Capitalism that's floating around here tonight, which delights me. I remember that famous book a little more than a decade ago by Michael Novak, Upon Two Wings, that Western culture is based upon both natural law and revelation, that both are affirmed by the Judeo-Christian worldview. In this new synthesis of our culture, we are now living on two wings, which is a secular left, and it is our job not to change our theological and moral positions one iota, because that is what they need from us. It's reality testing. Now, if any of you took a basic college philosophy course, which I assume an august crowd like this, most of you have, you will remember learning about the 19th century German philosopher who, for my money, was far more influential in some respects than even Immanuel Kant or Friedrich Nietzsche or Soren Kierkegaard, Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, whose famous theory about the outworking of history, of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, we all learned that theory is really what is responsible for relativism in our culture. Because it was Hegel who said that the wings of Minerva, the great owl of wisdom, only spread at dusk. That we never know until the end of an age whether a particular worldview was right or wrong, and that it is destined to change and always changing. Now, we've heard thesis, antithesis, synthesis, And the gestalt that we have now all accepted, both on the right and the left, is that the thesis in our time is the Judeo-Christian worldview. The antithesis is this pushback from a worldview that is no longer accepts transcendence. And for those of you that have read Charles Taylor's A Secular Age, which is probably 0.02% of us, because it's so long. Let's face it, we all just read Jamie Smith's book, How Not to Be Secular. You know, truth be told, none of us really got all the way through Charles Taylor's A Secular Age, so Jamie Smith, wherever you are, thank you for that public service. Charles Taylor talks about the fact that it's not just a revocation of transcendence in the public square, but it's this adoption of a new religious worldview of exclusive humanism. That's the antithesis. And now we are waiting to see what will come next. After the backlash, after, as we are hearing, the culture war is over and we lost, there's this new synthesis that's coming, and we wait to see what that is. Actually, if you've read Hegel, that triad, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, is missing a step. The step that is missing is called the negation of negation. Hegel's famous example of this is the French Revolution, right? Where the thesis is divine right of kings, the antithesis is revolution, and before there's the synthesis, which winds up being Napoleon, there is the negation of negation, which is the removal of liberty during Robespierre's reign of terror. There's always a negation of negation. And so, in a Buckley-esque sense, we need to remind ourselves that our job is to stand athwart history and to say no. That is our role. It's not fun to say no, but that is who we are, and that is our role in this particular circumstance. And so, our job is to re-inhabit that enchanted worldview that Charles Taylor and Jamie Smith, by extension, talk about, and to be the scary, Bible-believing people that they fear us to be. That is our public service. That's what we've got to offer. That's what we have to offer to people. We have to be those people that Karl Barth says have rediscovered and believe and preach a strange new world inside the Bible. Do we really believe in the strange new world within the Bible? I've always been encouraged by leading figures in the history of the modern West that have been willing to let their freak flag fly on that very point. And I was reminded last week, talking to Rich Lowry from National Review. I was talking to him about coming to Acton University, and we were talking about Leszek Kolakowski's famous lecture at Harvard in 1987. And this moment was captured in the New York Review of Books obituary of Kolakowski, written by Tony Ute a few years ago in 2009. He describes going to hear Kolakowski speak at Harvard, and his book, The Main Currents of Marxism, had just come out. And the title of Kolakowski's talk was The Role of the Devil in History. And everybody, having known Kolakowski's work, his distinguished academic career, knowing his penchant for use of metaphor and also his close logical reasoning, they're like, wow, he keeps talking about the devil's activity in history. To what is he referring? Is this a metaphor for Lenin? And they keep going on. And then finally, Tony Ute, who wrote this obituary, said that his colleague, Timothy Garton Ash, leaned across the table to him about halfway through the lecture and said, "I've got it. He's really talking about the devil." So here we are in 2015, where authors like Jeffrey Taylor at Salon.com are saying Antonin Scalia should resign from the Supreme Court because he is not of sound mind, because he has FDS, faith derangement syndrome. He believes in a God who's not really there, and he believes in this world of good and evil. And we're in a world in which, oddly enough, the most powerful argument for the existence of God is the one that is mentioned in the great Soviet dissident Mikhail Bukharov's novel, The Master and Margarita. I'm just interested, how many people here, raise your hand if you've ever read The Master and Margarita? Okay, all right. Yes, we all have to get together after and have a book club because I really desperately need to talk to you about this book. But the opening scene of The Master and Margarita, there are three figures seated around a cafe table. You have a poet whose name is Ivan. His nickname is Homeless. You have a literary critic. His name's Berlioz. And you have a foreigner whose name is Professor Voland. And they're going back and forth, and they're debating whether or not Jesus was a historical figure. If you've read the book, you know that Professor Voland has an interesting take on that. And then they engage in a debate on the existence of God. And they go through all of St. Thomas's proofs, the 5 ways. They talk about Immanuel Kant's moral argument for the existence of God. And they dispatch all of those, and Professor Voland says, you're missing the most powerful argument for the existence of God. There's a 7th argument. And they're like, what is it? And Professor Voland says, tonight, to Berlioz, your head shall be decapitated from your body before the sun goes down. And sure enough, on his way home, Berlioz stumbles in front of a train, thanks to an evil cat, which just shows us that cats are truly evil. And he is, in fact, decapitated, and we find out that Professor Voland is the devil incarnate. So what I am saying tonight is, let's go ahead and give the devil his due, and we will find our role in society a whole lot easier as we continue to call a spade a spade. If the prince of the power of the air is determined to take away life and remove all doubt that he is active in the affairs of the world, then perhaps it really is our role in society to help save the world. Because, listen, we have played against type. As evangelicals, I can't speak for our Roman Catholic brethren here because that's not my tradition. But I can speak for evangelicals. We have desperately tried to play against type and be the nice guys and be the soft ones and be accommodating and being warm and fuzzy and winsome. And occasionally you might get Nicholas Kristof to write an article saying, you know, that doctor down there in Angola, he's not so bad. He's an evangelical, you know, thumbs up to that guy. But that's about, if that is what we are living for, let's go home. Let's shut it down and go home and play with our kids in the yard or do something different with our life. I think the more exciting thing is to have such a good time being the negation of negation that we sort of start making the other side, who believes that, you know, life is, you know, change and ever in flux and there's never any, you know, real right and wrong and black and white and moral juxtapositions, to make them wonder if jouissance is really only, maybe Father Sirico can talk about jouissance after he gets back from France, but to make them wonder if it's really these Puritans over here, these Christians, that are the ones that are really having a good time. My favorite example of this, and most of you, if you've heard me do other talks, I like to talk about the Elvis of cultural theory, the apoplectic Marxist, atheist, Slovenian philosopher Slavoj Žižek. Oh my God, no. In his book, The Puppet and the Dwarf, he is obsessed with G.K. Chesterton. And that G.K. Chesterton seems to be having such a good time not worrying that the world's going to hell in a handbasket. And just very much looking forward to going to Mass on Sunday. And in The Puppet and the Dwarf, I've cited this before, I cite it again here for affect. Žižek writes, the subversive sting in Chesterton's work is contained in the endless variation of one and the same matrix of the Hegelian negation of negation. So, for example, what if in our postmodern world of ordained transgression, in which the marital commitment is perceived to be ridiculously out of date, those who cling to it steadfastly are the true subversives? What if today straight marriage is, quote, the most dark and daring of all transgressions, unquote? I like that. And I think as you actually go through the history of 20th century philosophy, I've noticed this is a persistent theme, that the leading atheist and agnostic philosophers of the past century have developed their work and their understanding of what not to be only because they are responding to Orthodox Christian theology. It's fascinating. And it's just a litany. I can't even adduce them all. Maybe someday I'll give a total list, but I find it everywhere that I go. Let me just give you a couple of examples, and I could spend really 45 minutes just on this. But you think about, here is Ludwig Wittgenstein, who began with a very grandiose vision of what reality meant in terms of propositional language in the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, who works his way away from that confidence because it's not rooted in any sort of metaphysics. And by the end of the Tractatus, as you know, he's argued himself out of the thesis of his own book. And the final line of which is, whereof one cannot speak, one must be silent. And he flees to the mountains of Austria, horrifies Bertrand Russell. He goes into the witness protection program. Presumably, he's going to Yanni concerts, because that's the only people that I could imagine would be at a Yanni concert, would be people in the witness protection. That's where they all have to be. That's where they have their group meetings. And Wittgenstein really, for the rest of his life, is struggling with faith. His girlfriend in Norway eventually leaves him because he's spending 8 hours a day in prayer. Now, we have no evidence from Wittgenstein that he ever truly embraced the Orthodox Christian faith. But what's funny is that rather than hanging out with the Bertrand Russells of the world, when he came back to Cambridge, he hung out with people like Elizabeth Anscombe and P.T. Geach and Norman Malcolm. He died in Elizabeth Anscombe's spare bedroom. He wanted to be around people of deep faith. Or look at someone who's not exactly known for being a high example of Christian orthodoxy, Michel Foucault. Foucault was developing this radical theory about human identity that we are now seeing played out in public policy, that it comes from consciousness. Now, who is Foucault's interlocutor in the history of sexuality? It is the Church Fathers, it is John Cassian, and he's bothered by the fact that a person who does not have faith in God has no one to confess to. So the only person you can confess to is yourself. And for those of you that are conspiracy theorists, before Foucault dies of AIDS in 1984, he had almost completed volume 4 of his History of Sexuality, which was a very scrupulous reading of the history of Christianity and sexuality, and his estate will not allow that text to be published. I wonder why. Who knows? Conspiracy theories, I love them. I actually, Tony said I taught at this school in Norway. They said, what does it mean to be an American, Dr. Thornbury? And I said, it means at any given time you have to have a good conspiracy theory going. That's what it means to be an American. So there's mine. It's about Foucault and his history of sexuality. Or look at Alain Badiou, an atheist, Marxist French philosopher teaching at the École Supérieure Normale in France. In the aftermath of the Iraq War, he complained in an article that democracy has now triumphed over communism. And democracy equals, in the minds of the West, civilization. And democracy equals civilization, and civilization means free market capitalism. And democracy and civilization and capitalism are being advocated by and best articulated by, quote, the Christian and his Pope. I say we just lean into that. It's just like, finally somebody gets it. I think you're right, actually. Guilty as charged. Let me just give two other quick examples of this. The Los Angeles Review of Books refers to Peter Sloterdijk as the most erudite man living on the planet. He is a German philosopher. He's a talk show host in Germany. He is a professor of philosophy at Karlsruhe. And about 18 months ago, he published a major landmark work that's a part of a trilogy that he's working on, the title of which sounds like a Joel Osteen book. It's called You Must Change Your Life. That's the title of the book. Now, this is his love letter to atheist Europe. Sloterdijk's You Must Change Your Life. Now, he calls upon secular Europe to embrace a new atheistic monasticism. But throughout the whole book, his complaint is that atheism does not have the rich resources of the Christian intellectual tradition. Every single chapter is an argument that, well, here's what the Christians did. How can we imitate that? So in an early chapter, he talks about the need for new monastic communities of athletic atheism. And he says, before you beat up on the history of monasticism, as David Hume did, I want to know how many atheists climbed up to the top of summits before there was kind of technology to do so, and built these huge, wonderful communities on mountain peaks. You're not that athletic. You're fat and lazy, so get a move on. He talks about the need for atheist virtue ethics. And the whole chapter, he's talking about Aristotle and Aquinas, but we can't agree with their metaphysics, so we've got to do it on another basis. He talks about the fact that modern secular people don't seem to be willing to face death with bravery. I wonder why. He said, maybe it's because we don't have a Christ on a cross saying, "Testelestai," it is finished, and he calls Christianity has the greatest of all of the acrobats. This is what he calls Christ. The greatest of all the acrobats who descends to the depths and then springs back to life. We need a story like that. And on it goes. Another figure, this is my next to last one, Yulia Kristeva, premier semiotician in France, one of the leading feminist theorists of the last 50 years, professor of philosophy at the University of Paris, Diderot, wrote a book a couple of years ago, despite all of this, called This Incredible Need to Believe, in which, despite herself, she talks about these lectures that she gave at the cathedral at Notre Dame with titles such as From Jesus to Mozart, Christianity's Difference, Suffering, Lenten Lectures, and The Genius of Catholicism, in which she says this: she loves John Paul. And in this book, This Incredible Need to Believe, she writes, we would have liked him to be the apostle of women, of contraceptives, of sexual liberty, of condoms, of homosexuals. But this was to ask him to break with Christian tradition and his own convictions. This theatrical man was nothing if not a true Catholic, capable nonetheless of revealing to us the genius of Catholicism because he himself had the genius of incarnate speech. Wow. She gets it. She doesn't want John Paul to change. She wants him to stay just like he is. Finally, as an example of this, if you look at the #1 runaway best-selling business book of this past year, it's Peter Thiel's From Zero to One. Who is the major theorist behind From Zero to One? It's René Girard, who says, in order to understand all of culture, we need to go back to the scapegoat mechanism of the Bible. It's all built on mimetic theory, imitation, competition, creates conflict that ultimately produces violence, and the only way to alleviate violence is to have a sacrificial scapegoat, God incarnate, taking on all of the violence being directed on him so that we can have peace. That promotes good business. Because we can live in a society in which there's friendly competition, but there's an outlet so that we don't kill one another while we're doing it. Amazing. So my admonition and encouragement to all of us would be, lean in, keep on keeping on, and let your Jesus freak flag fly, because that's really deep down what they're looking for, ironically. Now, secondly, as we sort of kind of round third base here, I want to revisit the work of Hannah Arendt that I think is very helpful to us, because we seem to be stuck in a mode right now in our Christian organizations where it's almost like we're in junior high. And gosh, I really hope they like us. I want to think they like us. There was a show in the 1980s that Sarah Jessica Parker was in called Square Pegs, and they're constantly worried about the cool kids liking us. The cool kids are never going to like us. And if you read something like Hannah Arendt's famous essay, The Jew is Pariah, I think that it has a lot to say about how to live in a disenchanted cosmos. Now, we have to be very, very careful here. I do not want for a second to compare any slings and arrows of outrageous fortune that we experience in our institutions to have anything close to the suffering of what it meant to be and means to be a Jew, and to suffer from anti-Semitism. I don't want to say that. We have to be very careful about that. But I do think that there's a distinction that Hannah Arendt makes that it would be good for us to remember, and it's being experienced right now by Christians in the Middle East suffering under dhimmi status and being slaughtered by ISIS. And it is this distinction that Hannah Arendt makes between two types of Jewish people in society. She talks about the parvenu and the pariah. Two modes. Who is the parvenu? The parvenu is the Jewish individual who attempts to downplay his or her Jewishness as a means of acquiring and maintaining acceptance in polite socioeconomic circles. Downplay it, and maybe if you're good enough and exceptional enough, you can be accepted amongst the cultural elites. Hannah Arendt criticizes this approach because the thing that the parvenu gives up as a price of admission is prophetic witness in the political sphere. By just trying to blend in and not create a ruckus, you do what only the Jewish people have been able to do so effectively, is to give that witness of the prophets. The only other alternative, the only other category in an anti-Semitic world, Arendt says, is the pariah. And she talks about being the conscious pariah. And in this connection, she references several examples of this. One of the most compelling and beautiful is she talks about Heinrich Heine, who actually, oddly enough, was a Jewish convert to Christianity. But he wrote this poem that elucidates what Arendt is talking about of being the conscious pariah. The poem is based around the story of a Jewish prince who, by some means of witchcraft, has been turned into a mangy dog. And it is his fate throughout the week to wander the city as this outcast of society, just a street dog, and to receive that kind of treatment. But at the end of the week, as the sun goes down and the Sabbath begins, he shapeshifts from being this mangy dog back into his original state as the Jewish prince. And this is who he is on the Sabbath day. Now that is a very beautiful image, because the conscious pariah, this dog, doesn't flee the city. He stays in the city. And this tension, this being the outsider, Arendt says, has created this unique ability of the Jewish people as stateless, as nationless, as being outside the law, to be dangerous and creative and innovative, and it gives them the competitive advantage that will ultimately win in the end. I think that that is something that we need to be thinking about as we're hearing new models for cultural engagement that would say our ability to be a political witness in this public spheres may be something we need to downplay or take a break on. Whether that be faithful presence, or whether that be the Benedict option, these models I don't think are as powerful as this notion of conscious pariah, and saying, even though we are not accepted in the same way, there's no way to argue with the incredible achievements of the Jewish people, flying in the face of anti-Semitism. And certainly it is something that could help us to think that maybe our role in a Christian setting is to be something akin to St. Simeon the Holy Fool. St. Simeon the Holy Fool was in the middle of the city square. People thought he was mad and raving, but because he was raving about divine things, people were converted and brought to Christ and brought out of their own hyper-rationality. So all I'm saying is this tonight. I'm just arguing for simple arithmetic that we teach our kids in elementary school. It's about negative integers. If you're anti about something that's negative, that makes you positive. Okay? So that's basically what the negation of negation, that conscious pariah, is something I think we can happily lean into. Now, in the last couple of minutes that I have here, I just want to bring a word of application and encouragement. What's going to have to dovetail with these two themes that I've talked about is, first of all, we have got to get our house in order as the church. Because if you read Athenagoras' letter to the Emperor Commodus in 177 AD, the basis upon which he could say, don't persecute us, we are your best citizens, is that he could say, there is no sexual immorality known among us, we do not induce abortions, and divorce is not known among us. That's going to have to come alongside this other element of prophetic witness that we've talked about this evening. And Athenagoras was doing it in much more averse circumstances than we are, because they thought that the Christians at that time were committing incest and cannibals. I mean, when you talk about feasting upon the body and blood of Christ, that doesn't exactly play on the Upper East Side, let me tell you. So what are some of the practical steps we can take as the pariah class? I want to just adduce two. The first is that I think we need to adopt what I would call the trifold Pauline strategy for cultural engagement that we find over and over again in his ministry. Where did Paul spend the majority of his time? Now, you'll expect this coming from a guy who's leading an institution in New York City. My dad once said, "Son, where you sit determines where you stand." And I think that that's very often true. But where did Paul spend the majority of his time? Corinth and Ephesus and Rome. Now, Rome didn't exactly turn out the way he wanted it to, but he was in Corinth for almost 2 years, all combined. He was in Ephesus for 3 years, and what was he doing while he was there? He was a small business owner. He did not take money as a cleric. He was a model of free enterprise. He was a leather worker. The Corinthians hated this. They wanted him to be a talking head. He put out a shingle and developed a business. And you see this when he goes to Athens, if this is his model. First, synagogue. See if the people of God will wake up. 2, the agora. Reach the business community. We need a lot more development of that in our Christian nonprofit colleges, universities, and organizations, and the ones that are not putting free enterprise first deserve to die. They need to go away. And then third, Paul is concerned with reaching the academy. In Athens, he goes to the Acropolis. And it is we know from church history, that it is that witness on Mars Hill that sparks this amazing flourishing of Christian education throughout the history of the West. I think this is incredibly important because more important than starting maybe, I'm going to say something a little bit controversial here. I think at least this much. For every church plant, there ought to be a small business created too. Because as William Deresiewicz, the Yale professor, has said, today's ideal social form is not the commune or the movement or even the individual creator as such, it's the small business. Every artistic or moral aspiration, music, food, good works, what have you, is expressed in those terms. So for those of you that are supporting free enterprise, rock on. Finally, we need to find new ways to co-op the forms of the zeitgeist and harness them to tell the story of the gospel. We need to look for the bronze serpents of our culture. If you look at Numbers 21, you would not anticipate the emblem of salvation being the serpent, because this is an emblem of satanic activity in the ancient Near East. In Egypt, everywhere you go. Why did God choose that? It's because deeply embedded in the mythology of the Epic of Gilgamesh, for example, it is the snake who eats from the tree of life and he has eternal life. That is something that everyone could know. Even if they had not read the Bible, that was a part of the background of that religious worldview, and that was co-opted and brought forth, and that became the symbol of the gospel. For as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so Christ will be lifted up. We need to be looking for those cultural forms that we can co-opt, flip, and harness for the purposes of evangelism in our time. And yes, I said that, evangelism. We need to go back to that swagger of telling people about Jesus in unexpected ways. I will end with this. Last night, and I would encourage you, while you are in Grand Rapids, make it over to Cornerstone University. And do we have people from Cornerstone? Their new chapel, I had dinner with the artists, Peter Brandis and Maya Engelhardt, who have created the stained glass windows and the cross in their new chapel. They are rock stars in Europe. We don't know who they are here, but they are famous in Europe. But they take modern art, and they are the favorite artists of, Peter is the favorite artist of Margrethe, the Danish queen, and she commissioned him to do the Roskilde Cathedral. And he takes modern art forms and tells this story over and over and over again. Even when you think Christ is invisible, Christ is walking with you. As you leave the Roskilde Cathedral, you find a picture of Christ with two disciples on the road to Emmaus. Christ was invisible to them, but he was walking with them. Maya, his wife, developed a beautiful chapel in which, when you come to the altar and you kneel, you see Mount Sinai in a carpet mosaic, the burning, the smoke, and the fire, the darkness, Deus absconditus, God hidden in Mount Sinai. And when you raise your head to receive the elements of the Eucharist, there you have Christ revealed in the gospel, the body and the blood. God is no longer hidden from us. He is available to you there in the resurrection. You see a picture of the resurrection. So I want to close simply by saying, your institution that you are representing that is on this card tonight has a lot of fire and fuel left in the tank for this journey. It is incumbent upon us to find all of the resources possible to keep us in the game while we wait. For the grace of God that brings salvation has appeared to all men. It teaches us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions and to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives in this present age while we wait for the blessed hope, the glorious appearing of our great God and Savior, Jesus the Christ. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Awesome. Here's water for you
sure.
there.
Great, thank you.
Great.
Thank you. Oh, thanks. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much. It's difficult to know exactly how to follow up with that. It raises some really, really important questions for those of us who sort of live and breathe in spaces where we often are not around people who are sympathetic to sort of orthodox Christian understandings of the human person and life and liberty and human flourishing. And I'm wondering if you could help us think about, this is sort of first question, help us think about, why it is that we are so afraid of being pariahs. That's the first question I'm going to have for you. So as you think about that, I want to lay out the ground rules for tonight. So just rule on that for just a moment. Mm-hmm. We have 3 or 4 microphones, I believe. So as Dr. Thornbury answers this question, feel free to walk up to one of the microphones to ask a question. We are actually going to ask questions. So I'm a professor, so I have to tell my students, questions begin with words like who, what, when, where, why, how, etc. So feel free to come up to the mic and ask your who, what, when, where, how question as we do the question and answer portion for tonight. Emphasis on question part.
There's nothing as glorious as an interrogative.
Yes,
so,
exactly. So could you help us there? Why do you think we're...
I think for 2 reasons. This is going to be pretty prosaic. The first thing is that we don't have a lot of experience with this. We've lived in relative peace and security, and we've read a lot of things that talk about the glory of the Christian West.
Sure.
We are legatees of a great Christian intellectual inheritance. Look at all of our institutions, the universities, the hospitals, the freedom and rights. This all comes from us. And so when someone does not see that, it feels we're incredulous.
Right.
So we just keep wanting to say, but we're really awesome. You know, and we all know that when you're trying to woo someone or win someone over, you know when you were dating your spouse or you know, you're someone you're attracted to, at that stage you've lost. When you're like, but no, wait, you're leaving? No, wait, I'm really awesome. I'm really wonderful, I promise. No, look at all my wonderful traits and attributes. You're tanking fast. And we're sort of fixated with trying to produce that argument over and over again. And I think we may almost be beyond that. So that's number one. And then the second thing is, I think we are kind of locked into, I referenced this, sort of an arrested adolescent state of development where we think like equals love.
Sure.
And I don't think like equals love. I think love is actually that notion of it's in the Trinity. It's hypostasis. It's difference that makes us love one another.
Right, that's great. And there's also the sense in which I think there's a bit of nostalgia about the past. Right? We want to go back to the days when it was easy.
Yeah.
As opposed to thinking about the fact that it's going to be hard.
Yeah, but the past is never what we think it is, you know.
Sure. Right.
So you know better than anybody, and you've written about that. So I think we have got a few folks now.
Yeah.
Where do we start?
We want to start over to my right. This is my right. Yes, my right. Brother on the microphone. Just tell us your name and where you're from. Ask your question.
My name is Seth Connell. I'm from Long Island, New York, and I represent Regent University. One of the things that you had mentioned...
Would you like to transfer? I'm kidding.
All right. My mom actually went to King's College, but I decided to go to
terrific.
Regent, so.
Tell her I said hey.
Okay.
Make sure she's on the alumni newsletter.
Anyways, one of the things that you had mentioned towards the end of your remarks is that we as the church need to get our act together. And I think a major part of that is we need to get back to the emphasis on the intellectual as well as the emotional and spiritual aspects of our faith. This is something that Ravi Zacharias has hit on quite a few times, and I think he's got a point, where we know less and less about what we believe, but we are more and more excited about why we believe it. So there's kind of an imbalance there. So how do we get back to knowing what we believe as the church?
Right. Well, I think the principal way we do this is through church leadership. And I think that, most of you would have seen it's one of the few worthwhile things on Facebook in the last week. It was a list of the top, I think David Innes at King's posted this, is where I saw it, the top 10 Christian books of 2015. And they're so vacuous. They're not theological at all. So I think what we have to do is develop a firm list that we expect people to read stuff before they can become church members. Not everyone is going to become an intellectual, but there are a few things that you ought to know about as sort of a base before you can be received into the church. I think there's another like versus love. We're so desperate to get people to join that we don't really require much of them. And so I think really highly curated reading lists are a good thing to do, and just have that culture of reading within the church. I think that is probably the best way to start. If you can't name, like to someone that asked, the top 3 or 4 books on any topic, you're probably not a good overseer of souls. Thank you so much, Seth. Do you have anything you want to say to that, Tony?
I'm good. Where's the mic? Oh, right there. Yes, sir.
Thank you so much. Charlie Self with the Assemblies of God Theological Seminary and the Acton Institute. And thank you for a wonderful presentation. In view of your last answer, I want to ask the question, could you share a couple of your favorite contemporary Christian thinkers or literary figures that I'm thinking of Dorothy Sayers' The Whimsical Christian as one motif, but could you share with us just some of the people doing work that brings joy to you and that would bring joy to us as we go down this new road?
Sure. That's a very good question. I really want to underscore something actually I heard Tony say this week on social media, which is he has this thing going right now. You got to follow this guy because he's got some great stuff. You were pointing out that Francis Schaeffer did not write his first book until he was 56. I think we need to probably go back to that more, where people wait to write. I think, what'd you say, Burkhoff wrote, his systematic when he was 59?
Yeah, he's 59, yeah.
So I would want to make sure we go back and recover the heroes of our own tradition first and start there. And then as we have time, read up to the present. As you've heard tonight, I sort of find a lot of joy in reading secular thinkers that are actually going back to our classic texts. So that is what I personally do. But I do find that Tim Keller in New York City, who we all know, he is a great one to give to people that are just exploring for the first time. And but yes, otherwise I'm going to work in reverse order and probably give them The Abolition of Man, An Experiment in Criticism, other things like that are classic texts first, and encourage them to read up in the tradition first before we get to too many modern authors. I just don't find a lot of stimulation in contemporary evangelical theological literature right now. It doesn't have a lot of pizzazz.
Right, very good. Brother right here, yes.
Thank you. I'm Jason Brown from Canada. I live in Toronto. What would you say to Christians like me who really want to be Chestertonian, sort of joyful fighters and fly the Jesus freak flag, but who have families that they're responsible for and are afraid that this will mean, attracting this kind of attention will lead to them being excluded from their career, the society where they need to make a career, won't be able to make a living, get fired, these kind of things?
I was asked that question last week at an Alliance Defending Freedom conference by kids, that most of them were coming out of Ivy League schools, and we were talking about this too. And the fear of retribution is real, but only the person that confronts their fears will truly be free. So I would say, first of all, you never know until you try. And the second thing is yes, there are real scary stories out there, but I am worried about calling ourselves persecuted, because it is nothing like what the Jews have faced, and it is nothing like what the early church faced. So until we are being imprisoned, when we get to that point where, Cardinal George said, I'm dying in my bed, my successor will die in jail, and his successor may be killed in the streets, then we can truly be fearful. But my experience is that if you are excellent at what you do and you make yourself indispensable in your workplace, things will be okay. Thank you, brother.
Great question. Over, yes.
Here, thank you.
RDC, yes, go ahead.
I am Tobias de Marcos from Argentina, from the Instituto Acton in Argentina. And my question is closely related to the first question and to Sam Gregg's talk last night about truth. And is, what do you think is the true meaning of the word tolerance? And because it's been used in different ways, What are your remarks on that?
I think what tolerance is, what I want to focus on in my response to you is a little bit indirect, but it's something I didn't get to talk about tonight. Peter Berger, his most recent book published last fall, The Great Sociologist of Religion, in his most recent book, essentially apologized for coining the term secularization, because he feels as though it gave this motif that people have really run away with. So he apologized for coining secularization. What he said, I really meant to say, is that we live in a pluralistic world in which you are free to make the case for what you believe, that we don't have an inherited situation. So I think what tolerance means is to live in a society in which you are still allowed to make the case. That doesn't mean that people will like it or accept it or think that you're cool for saying it, but that's what it means. It means having the ability to be a part of the pluralistic environment. Now, the upside to that is that when you win over a disciple, it feels really, really good. And it's sort of odd. I think it's odd that we find ourselves in an environment where we love free markets, except in religion and culture. And that's what, to me, tolerance means, is to be able to make the case on the subway. Because I get it all the time. Wait, you mean you actually believe in all this Jesus stuff? Yep. So I think that's what it means. I'd love to know what it means in Argentina.
I can't explain that. It's too difficult in Argentina.
Okay. I'll see you after. Thank you.
Okay. Over here, yes, brother. Yes.
Michael Monder, also from Regent University. In your talk tonight, as I understand it, you're saying that the church needs to stand in opposition to the culture that we're currently living in. But social commentators that I've read say that one of the problems with both the church and conservatism is that they speak from the negative, and they always say what they are standing against, but not what they are standing for, and that the church would be much more effective if they gave a vision that people could follow, instead of saying just you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. So I was wondering if you'd comment on that.
Yeah, you know, I would say I'm guilty for having said that myself in my own book. And I do think that there is a point to that. In other words, you cannot only do via negativa. I do think people have to understand what you're for, but almost inevitably, as part of saying what you're against, you will make the case for what you're standing for. So you have to do them very close to one another in public address. But I think that narrative of you need to only say what you're for and not what you are against is good if you are on an interpersonal level. But in terms of public debate, it does have to be a very quick. We live in a Twitter culture, and you have to know in very short succession where someone stands on a particular issue. My concern in just saying we should just say what we're for and not what we're against is we get a little too subtle, and then people don't actually know where we stand. And that's the danger, is that saying what you're for can sometimes take a very long time, and sometimes you don't have that much time.
I guess the question is more not one to the exclusion of the other, but which is better to emphasize?
I definitely think it's always better if you have time to say what you are for, absolutely, rather than what you're against. But my point was tonight is that the role that we have been placed in is that we are being called to say what we are against, right? That we didn't get to choose that. We didn't want to choose that narrative. That is the situation in which we find ourselves, and that's maybe all we can do at this point. But in saying what you're against, I go back to, if you're anti again about something that's negative, that makes you positive. You will get to what you actually believe eventually. But in emphasis, always be positive. But they will make you, because we talk to the media, they will make you talk about what you're against. You'll have to do it. Thank you.
Very
it's
good.
a great question.
We have time for one last short question.
I was wondering if you would address a little. My name is Andre Cooper from Trinidad and Tobago, and I was wondering if you would address a little bit more something you mentioned at the end about the import of actually living what we're for and not living what we're against, humbling ourselves and praying and seeking His face and turning from our own wicked ways, and how that really works together with being a pariah.
Yeah. Well, I am struck over and over again as I look at the witness of the early church, is that they could make these claims about the life of the local congregation. I mean, there's some astonishing claims that they were able to make. And so I think that we have a very, very long way to go. So in a way, may I speak out of both sides of my mouth? May I? I talked a lot about speaking tonight, but I do think that there is a lot of repentance and solitude and silence and going back to Scripture and spiritual disciplines and training in holiness that we need before people will pay much attention to what we are either for or against. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you.